You know, Arknights has always been one of those games that seemed like I would be interested in. I mean, it has all the aspects that I imagine would make for a great experience, from the amazing characters, great soundtrack, fantastic art style, unique gameplay, aspects of geopolitics, storytelling, and of course, anime girls. But due to the lack of free time during my university days and just general lack of interest in these topics previously, I sadly never got the chance of trying it out. Well, with the announcement of the collab Limbus we'd be having with Arknights, I figured why not try to give it an actual chance, since I have all the free time in the world right now, and I've genuinely heard nothing but positive feedback from the people who have tried it out. So I did, and fast forward a few months in, and I gotta say, this has got to be one of, if not the best gacha I have ever played. Upcoming next is my full review of the entire game, and I'll even leave out a subsection later on to state all the things I like and dislike about the game personally. The game was first released on May 1st, 2019 on China, then later on global on January 16th, 2020. It was developed by Hypergriff, a video game development company based on Shanghai, China. Of course, the most important aspect of a gacha usually lies in the story and what message it tries to tell the audience. But since I've not caught up with the story yet, I'll try to explain it in a more general sense. So the story of Arknights takes place in an Earth-like planet called Terra. Now Terra is inhabited by many different races throughout its lands, and over the years, these different groups of people that inhabit it has formed into their own groups, eventually even establishing their own zones, territorial rules, and even countries. Terra is also no stranger to cataclysmic natural disasters known as catastrophes. These catastrophes produce a substance called originium, which can be utilized as an energy source, but there is a catch. If a living being were to be in prolonged contact with originium, an infection would actually start spreading throughout their whole system, beginning the crystallization of their own body cells. This disease is officially known as erypathy, and the people who bears erypathy are labeled as infected. The general themes of the story revolves around the exploration of the previously mentioned Terra and its many different cultures, whilst also not being afraid to discuss more mature and honestly realistic themes such as oppression, racism, xenophobia, and geopolitics that is unfortunately intertwined in the daily lives of the inhabitants, but primarily towards the previously mentioned infected, who faces constant discrimination in their daily lives. The role you take in the game is as the mysterious character known as the Doctor. Together with Amiya, a young infected personnel, who is sort of a secondary main character to the setting, you lead Rhodes Island, a registered drug R&D company made up of almost entirely infected personnels with very distinct age groups and cultural backgrounds, with the sole purpose of finding medical solutions for erypathy, whilst also providing the best medical and living conditions for its employees. Now, the employees who are registered with Rhodes Island are each assigned under the label of operators and are separated into 8 different groups based on their combat capabilities, called a class, referring to their combat specialties. And yes, it is actually implemented into the in-game mechanic itself. Starting off, we have the caster, a unit that specializes in range attacks and, as crazy as it sounds, utilizes their erypathy to cast arts, inflicting arts damage on their opponents. Defenders, a melee unit which specializes in halting the opponent's movements in large numbers. Guards, which fills a similar purpose to defenders but focuses more on outputting damage rather than just soaking them in. Now Vanguards in turn fulfills a pretty similar role to guards in a broad sense, but they're usually the first to be deployed in battle and can even function as a sort of support unit instead, depending on their skills and passives. Medics, which is a pretty self-explanatory role in that they focus on healing your injured operators as well as providing buffs. Snipers, a range operator that deals physical damage instead of arts damage, and are usually useful in taking out aerial opponents. Specialists, this one is sort of confusing to first-time players, but they're more of a gimmicky class that can counteract the opponent's action depending on the battle environment you're in. And finally, supporters. are operators that can give buffs to allied operators and debuffs to enemy units. But that would be a very broad explanation, since they can also do some other cool stuff like summoning, depending on their respective subclasses.
Huh?
Yes, you heard that right. Subclasses. As if the game wasn't intimidating enough to new players who are just starting to adjust to all the different main classes and their own functionalities, right? But well, not to worry, since you don't really need to delve too deeply into all these subclasses in the early game, since the difference in a subclass is also pretty minimal depending on some classes. For example, casters are separated into 7 different subclasses. Now I won't go through every single one of them here, but let's take 2 of the most simplest ones. For example, Core Casters is a subclass that focuses more on dealing damage to a single target opponent, while Splash Casters focuses more on inflicting AoE damage, resulting in different uses for different circumstances. There are so many more examples of this, and as I've said before, there are a staggering amount of variety in gameplay styles that each complements your own playstyle. For this exact reason, Arknights, in my opinion, has perfected the class system much more than any other gacha games I've tried out before. Speaking of, let's actually discuss Arknights' simple and unique style of gameplay, especially for a gacha game, which is, as I've said it before, in the tower defense genre. The basic concept of the gameplay is enemies will spawn from the red box and follow a line of pattern to reach the blue box. You accumulate deployment points to drop your operator from the team you form to stop enemies from reaching the blue box. And that's quite literally it. But obviously, as we've established, the game has a huge chunk of playable operators and enemies, including normals, elites, and even bosses, all with unique set of skills, individual stats that you can actually look up in game, and attack patterns, and even passives that makes the game in turn not so repetitive. Each single level is also designed as different as possible to avoid the fear of gameplay being too repetitive. For example, the different summonable utilities you'll have, or the different tiles that each serve different purposes that benefits or even harms your playing experience. And just like that, we have once again arrived at the most important section in a gacha game, the the gacha. And I gotta say, I love it when gachas implement their summon system into their actual lore, and Arknights is not an exception to this. The process is labeled as headhunting here. Using the in-game currency of Orundum, you pull for different rarity operators from a suitcase that shows you their operator files. And I just love the idea that the doctor spends their hard-earned cash from completing life-threatening missions on literally gambling on operator employment requests just for the sake of getting better employees. As for the rarity, Arknights also edges out most other games in this regard by having not just 1, not 2, and not even 3, but 6 different rarities for every operator for every single class. And what I absolutely adore about this is the fact that Arknights go out of their way to put a description behind every single rarity, justifying what an operator deserves to be placed in that specific category of rarity. Also, please note you can't actually get 1 and 2 star operators from the headhunt section. Instead, they can only be acquired from using recruitments, which is another method of acquiring new operators without using any Orundum. It instead relies on the amount of time you select for that specific recruitment, with every recruitment requiring recruitment permits. There are multiple different keywords that you can mix and match if you want to trial and error your way in, but since on the early game, recruitment permits are going to be pretty rare, I suggest you just hop on the recruitment calculator website and select and see the results of the pairing you chose directly on the site. It's a pretty helpful tool. Of course, we can't discuss gacha without discussing the pity system, and the pity system in Arknights is sort of a unique case. Basically, for every 50 pull you do on the banner, the chance of getting a 6-star increases by 2%, which means after 100 pulls it'll increase again by 2% to 4%, continuing in this fashion until it reaches a max of 100%. This trend continues until you hit your first 150 pulls. If you haven't acquired the rate-up operator of the selected banner, the next 6-star operator you do get is guaranteed to be the rate-up 6-star operator. So they don't even guarantee you a 6-star, just that the next 6-star you do get is guaranteed to be the 6-star of the rate up. Now I'm not gonna lie, that is a pretty messed up pity system, but not unreasonable. Since, for example, most rate up banners guarantee you the limited 6-star operator after at least 300 pulls, and with each pull you do, they give you something called a headhunting data contract, which you can accumulate to also redeem for the limited 6-star operator in the store. Now it's time to talk about everyone's favorite subject, aka monetization. And all I'm gonna say is, Arknights is a particular master in promoting their in-game store. But we can't really discuss their approach to monetization without discussing a system that is equally as integral to the game, which is operator leveling. So TLDR, to further increase an operator's level, you'll need something called a battle record, which you can easily farm in game since all levels come with an autoplay feature, which means you can just leave the game to do its own thing while you go about and do something else more productive. But there is one massive issue. Completing an auto battle, which is by the way only limited up to 6 times per round, takes a huge chunk of sanity that is mostly limited in the early game. I mean, sure, there are items that you can use to refill your sanity, and leveling up actually refills your entire sanity bar. But the further you get into the game, obviously the harder it is to level up, and those items aren't exactly super common. Furthermore, leveling up your operators are actually capped into 3 different stages, starting with Elite 0, Elite 1, and finally Elite 2. For example, once you get your operator to their max level, there is an opportunity to promote said operator into the next rank. Now the cost to promote an operator into their next rank varies heavily on their respective rarity, as promoting a lower tier rarity operator could cost you almost nothing, since some operators of the lower rarity don't even get a chance to have a promotion, whilst operators of 5 and 6 star rarities could literally cost you days or even weeks in the early game to max out. Well, that's where the glorious store section comes into play, since you can bypass all of those processes just by one swipe of your credit card. Whilst the store also offers some classic Originate Prime, the most worth you'd get out of your buck is usually within the pack section, where they sell these instant level ups, instant promotions, and even a free 6-star selector sometimes. But one thing to also keep an eye out for is the Arknights monthly card, which is more like an investment purchase since it lasts for 30 days, and during those 30 days, each new day you log in, it provides you with daily rewards of a random and an emergency sanity booster. But alas, no game is perfect, and as much as I like to glaze it, Arknights is unfortunately not an exception. Now of course, every single point I will mention here are all my own opinion, and if I'm being honest, there's only really one major issue I have with the game, and said issue doesn't really tarnish the game's enjoyment for me in a significant way. The issue being the most obvious one, and I think one that a ton of people will agree with me on, is the story. Now hold on, put your pitchforks down. I'm not here to judge the quality of the story, but rather its length. Arknights has 6 years of story content for you to catch up on, and I've said before how each story chapter is divided into these nodes. Well, finishing just one of these nodes could legitimately take around 15 to 20 minutes depending on how fast you read, and this gets progressively worse the further you progress into the game. I feel like sometimes they just cramp up content into a single node or sub-chapter until it reaches a conflict or battle in the story. And this is made even worse by the fact that the game isn't voiced, which, to be honest, I can kinda understand why they did that, since the story of Arknights spans an entire fictional planet with very diverse cultures and languages, and that would take up an insane amount of budget and quite frankly unreasonable for every single VA to voice an insane amount of dialogue for every single chapter. But again, it is sort of a non-issue, since if you play the game in English dub, they actually do a pretty good job in giving unique accents and dialects to the respective characters of each regions in the world.
Hello, you must be the doctor. I'm here to visit my brother and sisters. Do I send the visitor's log here? Alright. Huh? Logistics operator employment contract? 年姐，你又骗我！
One other aspect of the story that I can give criticism on is them not really explaining what some terminologies in the story actually refers to. For example, during the earlier parts of the story, they would actually reference to the sarcasm a lot, to which when you first experience the story, you wouldn't know what they were actually referring to. It's only after you search up the term online or using context clues can you finally understand that they were actually referring to an existing race in the world. But that's about the only major gripe I have with the game overall. There are some other very minor problems I have, such as balancing, where some operators of certain rarities being way too OP. Like look at the 6-star rarities. They range from guy who defends lane pretty well to
Girl can solve the entire game from beginning to end by effectively nuking every opponent that deals massive AoE damage.
Or maybe how Myrtle, being a 4-star, is more useful than most 6-star rarities in the fact that she can generate a ton of DP in a short period of time. But again, I think Arknights still does a better job at balancing, and in general, power creep than most other gacha games, just due to the fact that they don't abandon the lower tier rarity operators to be left in the garbage, and even in certain situations, more preferable than the higher tier rarity operators due to cost effectiveness. But let's end things on a more positive note. Arknights is still absolutely one of the best experience you're gonna get from a gacha game. I mean, besides delivering an absolute cinema of a story, character design, world building, and gameplay we already talked about, there are still so many features and game modes that I didn't even get a chance to discuss yet. And whilst it is true that variety can leave you overwhelmed, it's more of a double-edged sword since it'll take you months or maybe even years before you can catch up with the rest of the player base. And I mean, let's be honest, logically most players would rather have too much content than not enough content. And as we've seen, Arknights is not at all lacking that particular part. It honestly all depends on the pace you enjoy the story, and I mean, the game is still making a crap ton of money from what I've seen. So there are no visible signs that they're stopping anytime soon. Oh, and of course, they're investing said money on a sequel/spin-off in the form of an open world gacha and factory simulation called Arknights Endfield. Basically on the style of Genshin/Wuwa, which is what I guess to be the norm or trend in the Chinese gacha landscape these days, but it is done with the inclusion of base building and the OG team role composition that the original Arknights have. I think it'll be a pretty interesting experience and one I am genuinely looking forward to when it inevitably releases. And yeah, that's all about what I have to say on this matter, so thanks for watching as always, and I'll see you all later, which is hopefully not in another 2 months.